One of the challenges for today's colleges is finding a way to create an inclusive and caring community, as well as preparing students for their professional careers in an increasingly diverse society. St. John Fisher College has embraced that challenge by becoming one of only 53 college campuses worldwide and 44 in North America to be part of the Sustained Dialogue Campus Network. Sustained Dialogue is a unique change process which focuses on transforming relationships that cause problems, create conflict, and block change. And it emphasizes the importance of effective change over time. This fall, Fisher students will have an opportunity to be trained as dialogue moderators so they might engage in peer-led constructive dialogue, addressing challenging issues of difference such as race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, among others. Today, on our community forum, we learn more about the Sustained Dialogue Moderator Training programs and why it is so important to St. John Fisher College. Stay with us. Welcome to our community forum. I'm Dr. Lauren Vicker of the Department of Media and Communication, and joining us today is Dr. Rick DeJesus-Rueff, Vice President for Student Affairs and Diversity Initiatives here at St. John Fisher College. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, so could you talk a little bit about the history of Sustained Dialogue at Fisher and how we got involved?
Back in the spring of, I think it was 2006, 2007, I was reading one of my professional journals, and in it was an article about sustained dialogue. And as I read the article, I began thinking about the program and how it might be useful here at St. John Fisher. The person who wrote it was a student, had been a student at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and was talking about her experience as a participant in sustained dialogue. This is the old days, so what I did was I made photocopies of the article. And I happened to have two students come to see me. One was Robert Taylor, he's an African-American student, he was a sophomore at the time, and Miguel Melendez, who was a Puerto Rican student, who was a junior at the time. Both of them knew me through the First Generation Scholars Program. And I gave each of them the articles without saying anything other than, read this and tell me what you think. And each of them took the article and off they went. And they both came back the next day and said, Dr. DeJesus, this is great. This is what we should be doing at Fisher. And I said to them, okay, if you can help me identify other students who'd be interested, then perhaps we could get ourselves started. And that's how we began. They went out and shared the information with peers, and in that first year, there were over 30 students who expressed interest in participating in sustained dialogue or getting involved with it.
Wow, and that was almost a decade ago then.
That was almost a decade ago.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about what sustained dialogue is and what makes it so valuable.
Well, sustained dialogue, and what got my attention, is very consistent with what I learned in my own graduate training as a counseling psychologist about learning to engage in active listening with the other person. Although sustained dialogue comes at it not from a counseling and therapeutic point of view, but more in a sense from a political point of view. How do you get people who are in conflict to listen to each other in a way where they can understand the basis for the conflict and then begin to identify common ground and actions which they can take together to improve their relationship and thereby reduce the level of conflict between them. And I thought, well, that's important. We think about all of these relations, race relations, gender relations, conflict between persons of different faith traditions, etc., all different types of conflict. To the extent that we stop talking past each other and start talking with each other, listening to each other. I often titled the process as one of learning to listen and listening to learn, so that people begin to understand, hey, there's a concept here, and it's one about me understanding rather than me trying to change you or convince you or make you different.
Okay. So can you give us maybe an example of how sustained dialogue actually works? I assume, so people are going through some kind of training.
That's correct.
And what does the training involve?
Well, for the moderator training workshops, what we do is we go through a whole series of exercises where we begin looking at, for instance, what are the kinds of issues that might exist? So we get students to think in terms of issues, what things that are important to them that they might want to talk about. And we always begin with an exercise that involves setting norms for the group. And that's a very active process in which all of the participants engage. And part of what we try to do is model the whole notion of listening. So I, as the facilitator of the session, would be listening to you and others offer what you believe would be helpful and a productive norm for us to have as we engage in the dialogue. Okay. I check with you. Did I understand correctly what you were telling me? Did I get it right? Did I word it in a way that makes sense to you? And then we all come to consensus. So they begin getting that experience right away of what it means to listen and then to respond back. We do other exercises and activities to try to help students become aware of difference. So for instance, a very commonly used exercise in lots of different venues, but which we also use in sustained dialogue, is something called walk a mile. And so we begin saying, okay, who's had these experiences? And people step forward and they begin looking at the group to see how separated the group is in some respects and how together the group is in other respects. One year it was very interesting because I've modified the walk a mile that we use to say that, for instance, there are times when I have skipped meals at Fisher because my meal plan didn't allow me to have enough meals in a week. I couldn't afford the full meal plan. Okay. And in one semester, there were 2 students who had marked that on their walk a mile sheet, and the other students were all surprised that anybody at Fisher would be somebody who couldn't afford to have a full meal plan.
Right.
And so they began to engage in discussions about socioeconomic difference and what does that look like and what does that mean for students at Fisher and how people might feel included or excluded because of their socioeconomic status.
So that's part of the training. How does this actually happen? How is this put into practice on the campus then?
Well, the opportunities to move forward on the campus would include opportunities that would be what I'm going to call informal. So students, as they're out with their peers and they begin engaging in conversations around issues of difference, they begin approaching it from a point of view of I'm listening to the other person and I'm engaging the other person. Very often the students who have participated in sustained dialogue will come back and say, I've started using some of this in my class, or I've started using some of this in my residence hall or in my student club or organization, and the communication has worked better. We've begun to make more progress in terms of trying to achieve a goal or do something that we're trying to accomplish as a group with less conflict and with less difficulty between ourselves.
So the students who are doing this are sort of doing it on their own in their own circumstances.
That's correct.
There's not a formal vehicle to use sustained dialogue in other...
Very often they're using it on their own, independently. We have tried to encourage students to think about forming their own independent groups if they can form a group, because that would allow them to engage with each other, to talk about what can we do at St. John Fisher College. We have not yet reached a point where we have sufficient interest and sufficient critical mass, I guess, of persons involved that would come together to form a group and then begin this process of dialogue, identifying an issue that they think is important here at Fisher to be addressed and what they can do to address that issue. Sustained dialogue is a 5-stage process, so part of that is figuring out why are we coming together, what is the issue we want to deal with, ultimately to get to the point of saying, and what action can we take together as a group to make things better.
And is it that structure that makes it different from other conflict resolution techniques?
I think to a certain degree the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Part of that resides in the fact, if you think about the origins of sustained dialogue itself, the model was not originally developed for use on college campuses. In fact, the model was developed in diplomacy. Hal Saunders, who was Undersecretary of State from the State Department of the United States, was the person who began using this model, or developing this model, and more, as he put it, by accident than by design, as he did his work in diplomacy. Probably a signal achievement he had was the Camp David Accords.
Oh boy, so it goes back quite a way.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
He was an alumnus of Princeton University. He went back for his 50th reunion, and students approached him to talk about race relations between students at Princeton, and was there a way that they could use this model to help? And that was the beginning, and that was in 1999, and that was the beginning of when sustained dialogue on college campuses began to be developed.
So that's why there are so many Ivy League and very high-profile schools on that list. And why do you think it is that more schools haven't picked up on this, that the fact that Fisher is one of a very select few schools in the country?
That would be hard. I could only speculate on that. I think part of it is an awareness. Sustained dialogue, the campus network is actually a very small operation. It was primarily staffed. When we first joined in 2007, I took several students, 2 students, down to Princeton for the summit. They had an administrator-student summit, and that was going to be our introduction to sustained dialogue. And when we got there and I began to learn more about the organization, I realized that it was staffed by individuals who had just graduated from college. Brand new, okay? And they were the trainers. And these were students who had participated in sustained dialogue at their colleges prior to graduation. And that in terms of professional staff and resources, well, Hal Saunders, who by that point had retired, was part of their mentoring process, and they had one other person, and that was pretty much it. And they were pretty much a grassroots operation working primarily with students, which was another thing that I found very appealing because it really put the focus on empowering students, providing them skills and abilities and the confidence to use those themselves.
So are students also used in the moderator training?
Yes. Once students complete at least one moderator training workshop and possibly 2 workshops, they have an opportunity to come back and assist in the training of other students. They could also help organize a group of their peers to come together and engage in sustained dialogue as a group to talk about an issue or approach a problem that they believe is relevant on the campus.
So you've been doing this for a few years. Have you had any experience with students coming back after they've graduated and saying whether or not sustained dialogue had an impact on them?
Actually, I have. There have been a number of students who've come back in the past few years to tell me that sustained dialogue has been an important part of their Fisher experience, that it's really contributed. Each year after the workshop is done, I send out a little survey for them via Qualtrics, and I get that feedback. And there's a part at the end where we ask them, how has this contributed to your Fisher experience? And most students will tell us that it has contributed significantly in a positive way to their experience as a student at Fisher. Prior to graduation, I've taken several times students to the National Summit in Washington, D.C. in the summer. And in one year, several years ago, one of the students who had participated in sustained dialogue, whose family had fled the wars in the Balkans, and she had come, and she was a very quiet student initially. She had begun participating, and she participated for 3 semesters in sustained dialogue in the workshop, participating in the workshop to improve her skills and become more involved. And when she was asked why she did this, she said it gave her her voice back.
Oh boy, that's powerful. That's very impressive. So what would you like to see happen looking down the road in terms of where you'd like to see the sustained dialogue program going?
Well, ideally, what I would hope is that we will reach a point where students themselves are willing to and able to engage each other within sustained dialogue groups, to get a small dialogue group going of their own that would literally be student-led, student-directed, that could then come forward with ideas about ways that they could make Fisher a better place, a more inclusive community for others. The issue of inclusion is always real. It's always a challenge. And each year we bring in 500, 700 new students. How do we help make them feel part of the community, not only through the things that we do with orientation, but even around these other issues where students, after they get past orientation, and say, okay, now I have to think about other issues, about who I am and how I fit in this community.
Right, exactly. So could you tell us a little bit about what you hope for this training in terms of how many students you'd like to have and what the process is going to be for them to get involved?
Okay. Well, each semester I look for a group of between 8 and 12 students, because that's the ideal number of students to work with in the context of doing the group, that they then have an opportunity to practice some of the skills themselves. They begin to form their own bonds with each other as part of this group process. So that's what I'd be looking for in terms of numbers, and there's still opportunity for students who would like to do that in the workshop this semester. They will learn many of the active listening skills on which we focus through this training workshop, and have the opportunity to practice and then get a sense of, this is how I can approach people when there's conflict, and engage them in discussion in ways that would produce something positive, as opposed to simply the constant banging of heads, and disagreement that often happens. Human beings, we're human beings, we do that. But if we're deliberate about things, if we're thoughtful about things, we can reduce the extent to which that has to happen. And I'd like to continue to promote that and encourage that for students.
So where would a student go to get more information or to sign up to be part of workshop?
Sure. Students can come up to the Suite 210 in the Campus Center. I have a sign-up sheet there. Or students can email me, or they can email Ms. Juana Vega in the Office of Multicultural Affairs. She also helps me in terms of the recruiting of students for Sustained Dialogue, and she's the advisor for the Student Club, which is separate from the workshop that we do.
That's great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's been really helpful, and it sounds like such a valuable program that really enhances what we're trying to do on the academic side and bring students together in the Fisher community. So appreciate your coming in today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share about it.
Coming up on our community forum, we hear from a faculty member who is incorporating Sustained Dialogue in her classes. Stay with us.
Did you find it? Elbows up.
We taught him how to hit a baseball,
Just like that. Say hi!
how to hit a receiver,
Nice.
the strike zone, the net. You taught him how to hit the upper corner. You even taught him how to hit the open man. But how much time have you spent teaching him what not to hit?
Welcome back to our community forum. I'm Lauren Vicker, and today we're talking about Sustained Dialogue at St. John Fisher College. Now we're joined by Dr. Jenna Rossi of the American Studies Department. Dr. Rossi has been involved in the Sustained Dialogue program in her classes for over 2 years. So thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So could you talk a little bit about how you actually got involved in Sustained Dialogue?
Sure. Dr. DeJesus, Dr. Rick DeJesus, I had talked to him. We both teach in the first year writing programs here at Fisher, and I loved what he was doing in class and wanted to find a way to bring it into his methods into my class. But he was actually doing the Sustained Dialogue Club here at Fisher for, I think it's about 10 years now. And I was trying to figure out a way to make it academic, because that's different. You don't just have people volunteering, you have people who are sometimes required to take a class. I had a student in my class at the time, Medea Bracamonte, who was in the Sustained Dialogue Club, and she said, Dr. Rossi, this is exactly, like, you would love this, you just got to do this. So in talking to the two of them, I eventually did the training myself on a Saturday with Rhonda Fitzgerald, who comes from the Sustained Dialogue Institute in Washington, D.C., and does an all-day training. And I got so into it, I said, we need to do a faculty staff training here. So we did that in May 2015 with Juana Vega from Diversity and Dr. DeJesus leading, and Rhonda Fitzgerald visiting from D.C.
So how did you decide how you would incorporate it into an academic class?
It took a while to figure out. I wanted some element of choice. So for example, I tried it in my feminist theory class, which has a lot of people who have already had me as a professor. It's a course in the spring. So I also had them vote. I left the room. I told them about Sustained Dialogues. I said, we need unanimous agreement in a 29-person class to do this. I left the room for 5 minutes or so, and they got me to come back in and said, we want to do it. So I needed buy-in, because that's the thing Rick made clear to me that you need. And then I just did a lot of background work, talking with Juana Vega, with Rhonda Fitzgerald, with Rick DeJesus, looking at the different ways they've led discussions, watching them. They really mentored me. And Juana actually co-facilitated the first class I taught it in, and I had Medea Bracamonte come back as a student co-facilitator in the second class. So I've had a lot of help, and I certainly didn't start this. I'm building on wonderful efforts.
So do you have to totally blow up your curriculum to make room for this? Because it is, I mean, moderator training is a time commitment.
Sure. I think a person could, but I tend, as an American Studies person who focuses on a lot of contemporary events that have to deal with identity issues, which are all over the newspaper now: race, gender, immigration, class. It naturally fits with my content. And I'm a person who naturally has a lot of student-led activities, projects, and things like that. So it did take a lot of planning and talking to some other staff who teach sustained dialogues across the country, and there aren't that many who are doing it right now. But that's how I made it work. And I'd put it on par with something like service learning or learning communities where you're either doing a civic engagement component or you're doing this something else in your class.
And those are things that are somewhat unique to St. John Fisher College, I think.
Yeah.
And so it seems like it was probably a good fit, not just for your subject matter, but also for some of the interests of our students here at Fisher.
Yeah, it was fantastic. The students at the end of my feminist theory class, we put on an event. Their class project was to put on this casual conversations event. We had 120 people in attendance, faculty, staff, and some senior level staff, and about 100 students. And they met for about 3 hours. There was an information fair on different topics, and then they each of 10 tables had a table discussion of a certain issue, like white privilege, campus sexual assault, things we're told not to talk about in polite conversation. And those students just wanted a forum to continue it. So that's my future goal, is to work how to get it out of that one semester drop off. And Rick does it with the club. Like, how do we keep that momentum going and build it? Because the students definitely have the energy, the interest, and the skill. They worked more independently on a project than I've ever seen in a core class.
So you think it built a lot of group esprit de corps among the students?
It was unbelievable to me. At the last minute, there are a lot of event planning details, and I'm not an event planner, and people just came and pitched in. It was like we're just a group of friends deciding to do something. I couldn't believe how much effort that they put into things. I had minimal supervision on their group projects, and they were really fantastic. They didn't have as much time as I usually give. There was, and it just, I think the buy-in helped, but they were so invested because the things I didn't expect were the connections they made with each other on a personal level. In sometimes an anonymous class, 30 people, you don't always know the people in class with you. Right. So it's their connections, and also the leadership, the voice that they gained. I didn't expect how much some of my shyer students would end up participating by the end of the semester.
Wow, that's got to be pretty gratifying then to have.
Yeah, some of the professors who attended the information fair actually commented on specific students and said, so-and-so was in my class, was completely shy in January, and now they speak up.
So what was it about sustained dialogue that drew them out?
I think the most important thing is, and Rick probably talked about this, the foundation of sustained dialogue is to talk about difficult issues, not in a debate, not as a judgment-free zone, a learning space, not a safe space like a lot of campuses are talking about now. It's not safe. You're risking revealing things that are personal to you. But if we base it on your experience, my experience, to come to understand why you feel how you feel, not you to argue to win your point of view, that your way is right and my way is wrong. If we just come to understand each other, that's how peace was created in the Middle East. That's how students can, if you look at the campus protests across the nation, if people feel they're being heard, we can make more progress towards action plans and solutions, which is the goal of sustained dialogues ultimately, is working towards small solutions that lead to bigger solutions.
So getting back to the logistics of this, I talked to one of my students who had been in your class, and he said that they met twice a week, and one day was kind of focused on the course content, and the other day was the sustained dialogue training. Is that pretty much how you've worked it out in your classes?
Yeah, the first time I tried it, it wasn't a natural fit in the syllabus, so that's a course I would not teach it in again, and they were brave guinea pigs. The second time, it was a real natural fit for my feminist theory class, because every week we talked about a different aspect of identity, sexuality, race, gender, so we could have prompts in discussion on the content on Tuesday, and on Thursday people would talk about their personal experiences or lack of with that particular topic.
Okay, so you used sustained dialogue to kind of move the conversation forward about the course content.
Yes, and also something, so what? What do we do about it? Because in a class like that, oftentimes students want a way to reach out to the campus community and let more people know about what they learned on birth control or about race relations or any one of many issues. So this was a way that they could actually feel that they had brought it out to a much wider community and got their friends involved. They had some people from the SGA attended the Casual Conversations event, and they came away with suggestions for fall orientation for first-year students and how to make campus more welcoming on our week of welcome.
Right. So that's got to be great to see something like that happen. Did that increase the positive feedback then that you got in that course compared to other times when you've taught it without using this model?
Yeah, it's generally a course that we make closer connections just by nature. The subject matter tends to be, whether you're male or female or you identify transgender, whatever, because it's about identity topics, people tend to make more of a personal connection in that class. But far and above, they learned more, they performed better, they were more cohesive. I got to know them better than other years.
And are you getting any feedback from students after the course? I know you said you wished there was a formal mechanism for taking it forward, but are they coming back and telling you ways that they have used what they've learned?
Some of them already have done it in class presentations. They felt much more comfortable speaking,
Right.
so that had nothing to do with the content, but the method. Other people are student ambassadors or peer advisors for Fisher's first-year programs, the class that teaches you sort of how to register for classes, how to join activities, things like that for first-year students. And they've had ideas of how they could work with their faculty advisor to get students to retain students, to make students more comfortable here.
So we just have a short amount of time left. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you might want to add, or anything that you think people need to know about sustained dialogue? And
If anyone at Fisher on the campus, faculty or students are interested, definitely contact me or Dr. Rick DeJesus or Juana Vega on diversity.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been great to hear it from an academic side.
Thanks.
And we wish you the best in your continuing endeavors with sustained dialogue in the classroom.
Thank you.
So for more information about sustained dialogue and to sign up for the Moderator Training program, students can visit the Office of Campus Life on the second floor of the Campus Center. And during the Involvement Fest, there will be a booth available for sustained dialogue.